The transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Vector pressed his armored hand against the viewing window. Below him stretched a planet covered in blue oceans and green lands. This was humanity's homeworld, though he found it difficult to believe such a soft-looking place could produce warriors worth his time. Vector stood nearly 8 feet tall, his gray, scaled skin as thick as combat plating. The Kralith species had been engineered for war thousands of years ago. His people knew no fear, felt no hesitation in battle. Every Kralith was born ready to fight and die without question. It was simply how they existed. The shuttle touched down at the military base, and Vector gathered his equipment. The Galactic Coalition had assigned him to work with Earth's defense forces for the next 6 months. He considered it beneath his skills, but orders were orders. Besides, he was curious to observe these humans everyone kept talking about. As he walked down the shuttle ramp, a group of human soldiers waited for him. They looked incredibly small and fragile compared to Kralith warriors. Their skin had no natural armor. Their bodies appeared soft and easily damaged. Vector wondered how such delicate creatures survived any battle at all. A human male stepped forward and extended his hand. He had dark hair and brown skin, and wore the insignia of a squad leader on his uniform. "Welcome to Earth, Vector. I'm Danny Martinez. I'll be your squad leader for this assignment," the human said. Vector looked at the offered hand for a moment before carefully taking it. He had learned this was how humans greeted each other. Danny's hand felt warm and small in his massive grip. The human smiled, though Vector noticed tension in his eyes. "This is Lisa Morgan, our best pilot," Danny continued, gesturing to a woman with blonde hair tied back in a tight knot. "And the rest of my team," Lisa nodded at Vector. "Good to have you with us. We've heard impressive things about Kralith warriors." "I hope to meet your expectations," Vector replied, though privately he doubted these humans would meet his. Over the next few days, Vector trained with the human squad. He watched them practice with their weapons, run through combat drills, and prepare their equipment. Everything they did seemed adequate but unremarkable. What bothered him most was their constant display of nervousness. Before every training exercise, he observed humans checking their gear multiple times. Their hands would move quickly, their eyes darting around. Some would take deep breaths, others would speak quietly to themselves. Vector recognized these as signs of anxiety and worry. In Kralith culture, such behavior would be considered weakness. A true warrior felt nothing before battle except readiness. Yet these humans seem to carry tension in their bodies every single day. "Why do your people act this way before simple training?" Vector asked Danny one afternoon. Danny looked up from checking his weapon. "What do you mean?" "The nervousness, the repeated checking of equipment, the visible stress," Vector explained. "These are only practice exercises, yet your team acts as if real danger exists." Danny smiled slightly. "We train like we fight. I'm better to work through the nerves here than freeze up when it matters." "Your people experience fear during training?" Vector asked, genuinely puzzled. "Sure, fear keeps us sharp, keeps us alive," Danny replied. Vector said nothing, but internally he felt disappointed. Warriors who relied on fear were not truly warriors at all. They were simply civilians pretending to be soldiers. On the 5th day, an emergency alert sounded throughout the base. Vector was in the armory when the alarms began. He immediately grabbed his weapons and headed to the briefing room. The human squad was already gathering. Vector noticed their behavior had changed. Several humans were moving faster than usual. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she pulled on her flight gloves. Another soldier named Chris Henderson kept touching his weapon, checking it over and over. Commander Patricia Wells stood at the front of the room, her face serious. "We have a situation. Raiders are attacking the mining colony on Titan Station. Intelligence suggests this is the same group that hit 3 civilian targets last month. Approximately 40 hostile fighters confirmed." She activated a holographic display showing the station. "The colony has 800 workers and their families. Station defenses are offline. We're the closest response team. Mission is simple. Get there, drive off the raiders, protect the civilians." Vector felt the familiar calm that came before battle. This was what he was made for. He checked his plasma rifle and prepared his armor systems. Around him, the humans were also preparing, but their behavior disturbed him. Danny's jaw was clenched tight. Lisa kept swallowing hard, her face slightly pale. Chris Henderson was breathing faster than normal. "Are your people unwell?" Vector asked Danny quietly. Danny looked at him with an expression Vector couldn't quite read. "We're fine. Just getting ready." "You appear distressed," Vector observed. "Maybe a little nervous," Danny admitted, "but that's normal before a real fight." Vector frowned. A warrior should not feel nervous. Fear clouds judgment. Danny gave him a strange look but said nothing. They boarded the transport ship with the rest of the team. During the flight to Titan Station, Vector watched the humans carefully. Lisa sat in the pilot seat, her hands gripping the controls tighter than necessary. In the passenger bay, several soldiers sat with their eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately. Others spoke quietly to each other, their voices controlled but tense. This was unlike anything Vector had experienced with Kralith warriors. His people would sit in silence, calm and ready. These humans seemed to be fighting some internal battle before the external one even began. "Approaching Titan Station," Lisa announced. Her voice was steady, but Vector could hear a slight tremor in it. "I'm seeing multiple hostile ships. They're already firing on the station." Through the viewport, Vector saw the mining colony under attack. Raider ships circled it like predators, their weapons tearing into the station's hull. Explosions bloomed across the structure. "All right, team, this is what we trained for," Danny said, standing up and checking his weapon one final time. Vector noticed the humans' hands were completely steady now, despite the obvious danger ahead. The transport shook as they entered the combat zone. The transport rocked violently as enemy fire exploded nearby. Vector gripped his weapon and stood ready, his body perfectly calm. He glanced at the human soldiers around him and saw something that confused him deeply. Danny Martinez was breathing in short, controlled bursts. His fingers drummed against his rifle in a rapid pattern. Lisa's voice came over the communication system, higher pitched than usual, calling out enemy positions. Through the cockpit door, Vector could see her shoulders were rigid with tension. Chris Henderson sat across from him, and the young human's leg was bouncing up and down uncontrollably. His face had gone pale, and small drops of sweat formed on his forehead, despite the cool air in the transport. These were clear signs of fear. Vector had studied enough alien species to recognize panic responses. Yet the mission had barely begun. They had not even engaged the enemy yet, and already the humans were falling apart. 30 seconds to drop zone, Lisa announced. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Danny stood and moved to the door. "Equipment check. Sound off." One by one, the human soldiers called out their readiness. Vector noticed several voices were shaking. Chris Henderson's hand trembled as he checked his ammunition pouches for the third time in as many minutes. The transport suddenly dropped, performing an evasive maneuver. Two humans grabbed the overhead rails to steady themselves. Vector remained perfectly balanced, his enhanced body compensating automatically. "Taking fire from below," Lisa called out. "No, hold on. This is going to be rough." The transport spun and dove. Warning alarms screamed. Through the small windows, Vector saw raider ships pursuing them. Their weapons lit up the darkness of space with deadly light. "Brace for landing," Lisa shouted. The transport hit the station's docking platform hard. The impact threw everyone forward. Before the ship had fully settled, Danny had the door open. "Move! Move! Move!" he yelled. The humans poured out of the transport, and Vector followed. Immediately, weapons fire streaked past them. The raiders had troops on the station itself. Vector counted at least 15 enemies taking cover behind cargo containers and equipment. He raised his plasma rifle and fired 3 precise shots. 3 raiders fell. The weapon felt comfortable in his hands. Battle was where Kralith belonged. He felt no stress, no worry, only the clear focus of combat. Then he noticed Danny beside him, and what he saw made him pause mid-shot. The human squad leader was shaking, actually physically shaking as he moved forward. His hands vibrated as he aimed his weapon. His breathing came in rapid gasps. Every muscle in his body appeared tight with tension. But Danny kept moving forward. Despite the trembling, despite the obvious terror written across his face, the human advanced toward the enemy position. He fired his weapon with surprising accuracy, taking down two raiders even as his whole body shook. Lisa's voice came through their communication devices. "I need to get the transport clear before they destroy it. I'm lifting off." Vector heard the fear in her words. The pilot was terrified. Yet seconds later, the transport rose into the air. Through the chaos of battle, he watched Lisa pilot the ship through a storm of enemy fire. The transport twisted and turned, barely avoiding multiple direct hits. She was clearly frightened. Her voice kept breaking over the communication system as she called out warnings and updates. But her flying was exceptional. She managed to draw 3 enemy ships away from the station, leading them on a chase through the nearby asteroid field. "Squad, advance to the colony entrance," Danny ordered. His voice was tight and strained, but the words were clear. The humans moved forward as a unit. Vector joined them, but he kept watching their behavior with growing confusion. Chris Henderson was so scared that his weapon barrel visibly shook. Yet the young human kept firing, kept moving, kept following orders. Another soldier, a woman named Kelly Brooks, had tears streaming down her face. She was crying as she fought. Vector had never seen anything like it, but even while crying, she provided covering fire for her teammates with perfect timing. The raiders launched a counterattack, trying to push the human squad back. Energy bolts filled the air, an explosion went off close to their position, and fragments of debris rained down. Danny dove behind cover, pulling Chris with him. Both humans were breathing so hard they could barely speak. Their eyes were wide with what Vector now clearly recognized as absolute terror. "We need to reach that entrance," Danny said between gasps. "Next push, we go together. On 3. "I can't," Chris whispered. "Danny, I can't do this. There's too many of them." "Yes, you can," Danny replied. His own voice shook with fear. "We do this together, just like training." 1, Danny counted. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold his weapon steady. 2, he continued. Sweat poured down his face. 3, he shouted, and then both humans stood and charged forward. Vector watched in amazement. These were not warriors acting with calm efficiency. These were terrified beings forcing themselves to move despite every instinct telling them to run away. Yet they fought with courage that took his breath away. He joined the charge, laying down heavy fire. His shots were precise and controlled. But it was Danny and Chris who reached the colony entrance first, both of them shaking and gasping, but still fighting. More humans arrived from inside the colony. Local security forces who had been trapped by the raid. They looked just as frightened as Danny's squad, but they fought alongside them without hesitation. The combined force pushed the raiders back. Vector's superior strength and firepower helped turn the battle. Within minutes, the raiders were retreating to their ships. Lisa's voice came through the communication system. "Hostiles are pulling back. We did it." Her relief was obvious, but so was the exhaustion in her voice. She had been terrified the entire time, yet she had flown perfectly. As the last raider ship jumped away into faster-than-light travel, the humans around Vector began to relax. Several sat down heavily, their legs seeming unable to support them anymore. Danny leaned against a wall, breathing hard, his weapon hanging loosely in his grip. Back at the base, Vector stood in the debriefing room and listened to Commander Wells explain their next mission. His mind kept returning to what he had witnessed during the battle. The humans had been terrified, yet they had fought brilliantly. It made no sense to him. "Intelligence has intercepted raider communications," Commander Wells said, her face grave. "They're planning to attack a civilian transport carrying refugees from the outer colonies. 3,000 people, mostly families, fleeing the conflict zones." She brought up a star chart on the display. "The transport will pass through the Kessler debris field in 18 hours. The raiders plan to ambush them there. The debris field is extremely dangerous. We've lost ships there before." Vector studied the map. The debris field was a graveyard of destroyed vessels and shattered asteroids. Navigation through it required exceptional skill and split-second timing. One mistake meant death. "We need a pilot who can fly escort through that field and protect the transport," Commander Wells continued. I won't order anyone to take this mission. The survival statistics are not good. 70% of pilots who enter that field don't come back out. The room fell silent. Vector looked around at the human faces. Every single one had gone pale. Several people looked down at their hands. Others stared at the debris field map with wide eyes. Then a human male stood up. His name was Kevin Bryant, and Vector had seen him around the base but had never worked with him directly. Kevin was a pilot, one of the most experienced according to the other humans. I'll do it, Kevin said. His voice was barely above a whisper. His hands were already shaking, and he had not even left the briefing room yet. Vector watched as Kevin's face went even paler than before. The human looked like he might be sick. Kevin, are you sure? Commander Wells asked gently. I meant what I said. This is volunteer only. Those are 3,000 innocent people, Kevin replied. His voice shook with every word. Someone has to protect them. I'm the best pilot available, so I'll go. Vector saw that Kevin was absolutely terrified. The human could barely stand upright. His legs were trembling. Small beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. I'll need a weapons officer and a medical specialist, Kevin added, in case we encounter survivors in the field or if the transport takes damage. Danny stood immediately. I'll go. Amy Collins, the squad's medical specialist, yet rose to her feet. Me too. Vector watched both humans carefully. Danny's jaw was clenched so tight that muscles jumped in his cheeks. Amy had wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. Both of them knew exactly how dangerous this mission was. Both of them were clearly terrified. I will also join this mission, Vector announced. All the humans turned to look at him. Kevin nodded slowly. Glad to have you, Vector. Your combat skills might save our lives. Over the next 12 hours, Vector watched the human volunteers prepare. What he witnessed disturbed him more than any battle he had ever fought. Kevin sat in the pilot simulator for hours, practicing flights through debris fields. His hands shook on the controls the entire time. Sometimes he had to stop and simply breathe for several minutes before continuing. Once, Vector saw the pilot put his head in his hands, his whole body trembling. But Kevin kept practicing. Over and over, he flew the same dangerous routes. Each time, his flying improved slightly despite his obvious fear. Danny spent time checking and rechecking all the weapons systems. Vector noticed the squad leader would pause occasionally and stare at nothing, his eyes distant. Once, Danny's hand froze in mid-motion, and he stood completely still for almost a minute. Then he shook himself and continued working. Amy prepared medical supplies with methodical care. Her hands moved steadily through the work, but Vector saw her wipe tears from her eyes multiple times. She was crying silently as she worked, yet she never stopped preparing the equipment they might need. Vector approached Danny in the armory. I must ask you something. Why do you volunteer for this mission when you are clearly afraid? Danny looked up at him. Because those people need help. But the fear, Vector pressed. It affects your body, your mind. How can you function properly while experiencing such terror? Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the fear is exactly why I have to go. If I only did things when I wasn't scared, I'd never do anything important. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Vector considered this. In my culture, fear is removed through genetic engineering. We believe it makes us better warriors. Maybe it does, Danny replied. But maybe you also miss something. Yet when you choose to act despite your fear, there's a strength in that. You're not just following programming, you're making a choice. The words troubled Vector deeply. He spent the remaining hours before the mission thinking about what Danny had said. Finally, the time came to depart. The four of them boarded a small combat ship designed for speed and maneuverability. Kevin took the pilot seat. His hands were shaking so badly he had trouble fastening his safety harness. Danny had to help him secure it. Ready? Commander Wells asked over the communication system. Kevin took several deep breaths. Vector could hear the human's rapid heartbeat from across the small cabin. The pilot was more frightened than Vector had ever seen any being before. "Ready," Kevin said, though his voice cracked. The ship lifted off and headed toward space. Or as they left Earth's atmosphere, Vector saw Kevin close his eyes briefly. The human's lips moved silently, as if speaking words only he could hear. Amy sat with her medical kit clutched in her lap. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. Danny stared out the viewport, his expression distant and haunted. These humans were flying toward almost certain death. Every one of them knew the statistics. Every one of them understood they would probably not survive. Their bodies showed every sign of complete terror. Yet not one of them had refused the mission. Not one had run away. They sat in this small ship, shaking and sweating and fighting their own panic, because 3,000 strangers needed their help. The alarm systems throughout the base screamed to life at dawn. Vector was already awake, or having spent the night reviewing combat data. He grabbed his weapons and rushed to the command center. Commander Wells stood before a massive display screen showing dozens of red markers. Her face was grim as she addressed the assembled soldiers. "We have a major situation. The Raider fleet has launched a full-scale attack on the outer colony network. They're hitting all 3 stations simultaneously. Intelligence estimates we're facing over 200 hostile ships." The room fell into stunned silence. Vector quickly calculated the odds. The base had maybe 30 combat-ready ships and 100 soldiers. They were outnumbered almost 7 to 1. "Every available pilot and soldier is being deployed immediately," Commander Wells continued. "This is not a drill. If these colonies fall, thousands of civilians will die. Either we hold the line here, or we lose everything." Around Vector, the human soldiers began moving. He watched their faces carefully, and what he saw no longer surprised him. Every single human was terrified. Their fear showed in trembling hands, pale faces, and rapid breathing. But every single human was also suiting up and preparing to fight. Danny appeared beside him, fastening his armor. The squad leader's jaw was clenched tight, and Vector could see the tension in every muscle of his body. "Big fight ahead," Danny said quietly. His voice shook slightly. "You are afraid," Vector observed. It was no longer a question or a criticism, simply a statement of fact. "Terrified," Danny admitted. "This is probably the worst odds I've ever faced." Near the armory door, Chris Henderson was being sick in a waste container, and the young soldier's whole body shook with fear and nausea. Yet when he finished, he wiped his mouth and picked up his weapon. He was still going to fight. Lisa came running into the armory, already in her flight suit. "I'm taking Squadron 3. We're going to try to break their attack formation on the northern colony." Vector saw the fear in her eyes. She was absolutely terrified of what was coming. Her hands trembled as she pulled on her flight gloves, but her voice remained steady as she called out orders to her pilots. "Vector, you're with me," Danny said. "We're boarding Transport 7 with the Rapid Response Team." They rushed to the landing platform. The transport was already warming up, its engines glowing in the early morning darkness. 20 human soldiers climbed aboard, and Vector joined them. So the flight to the colonies took only minutes at maximum speed. Through the viewport, Vector saw the battle already raging. Raider ships swarmed around the colony stations like angry insects. Explosions bloomed constantly as weapons fire struck shields and hulls. "This is Transport 7 requesting docking clearance," their pilot called out. Her name was Rachel Cooper, and Vector heard the fear in her voice. "Negative, Transport 7, came the reply from the colony. "Our docking bay is under direct fire. You'll be destroyed if you approach." Rachel's hands tightened on the controls. "Understood. We're coming in anyway. Those people need help." She pushed the transport forward into the storm of weapons fire. Energy bolts streaked past them on all sides. Warning alarms screamed as their shields took multiple hits. Vector gripped his weapon and remained calm. This was simply combat. Dangerous but manageable. He glanced at the human soldiers around him. Every single one was terrified. Some had their eyes squeezed shut. Others prayed quietly. Chris Henderson was crying openly, tears streaming down his face. But when Danny gave the order to prepare for combat drop, Every human responded immediately. The transport shook violently as it pushed through to the docking bay. The moment the doors opened, enemy fire poured in. Two humans near the door were hit immediately and went down. Amy Collins was there in seconds, dragging the wounded soldiers to cover while energy bolts flew around her. She was so frightened that her hands shook as she worked, but she never stopped treating their injuries. "Forward!" Danny shouted, and charged out of the transport. The human squad poured out behind him, all of them terrified, all of them fighting anyway. Vector followed, impressed despite himself. The colony station was chaos. Raiders had breached multiple sections. Civilians were trapped throughout the structure. The human soldiers split into teams, fighting to reach the trapped families. Vector found himself alongside Danny, pushing through a corridor filled with enemies. A massive explosion went off to their left, and part of the wall collapsed. Danny was thrown against the opposite wall hard enough to crack his helmet display. The squad leader fell to his knees, clearly dazed and hurt. Vector moved to help him up, but more raiders appeared ahead. He turned to face them, calculating firing angles. Then he heard Danny trying to stand. The human was injured, possibly badly. Blood ran down the side of his face from a cut above his eye. He should have stayed down, should have waited for medical help. Instead, Danny forced himself to his feet. His legs shook with the effort. His breathing came in pained gasps. But he raised his weapon and stood beside Vector. "Why?" Vector asked as they fought side by side. "You are injured. You should retreat." "Can't," Danny said between shots. "You're my brother in arms. Fear doesn't change that. Pain doesn't change that." Something shifted in Vector's understanding at those words. He looked at Danny. Really looked at him. The human was terrified of dying. His body was screaming with pain from his injuries. Every instinct he possessed probably told him to run and hide. But he stood his ground because a teammate needed him. The battle raged for hours. Vector fought alongside humans who were pushed beyond their limits. Lisa's voice came over communications repeatedly, reporting impossible flying maneuvers while her fear was clear in every word. Amy worked on wounded soldiers while under direct fire, crying the entire time but never stopping. Chris Henderson saved 3 civilians despite being so scared he could barely walk straight.